Did you know that there are different ways to connect the data with Power BI? Welcome back, Data Analysts. This session is going to be super critical, so I want you to watch carefully till the end. Because in this session, we are going to discuss about the different modes of getting data into Power BI. Now, there are three such modes. One is import, one is direct query, and then we have live connection. I think I have discussed about it in a very short manner in my last session, but in this session we are going to elaborate it and we are going to understand these modes in depth. So let's talk about the very common and default mode, which is import mode. What happens when you use import mode? When you use import mode, Power BI copies the data from the data source and then a compression mechanism takes place, which compresses the data and optimizes the data, and then the data gets stored to the disk by VertiPack engine. So first let's understand this compression mechanism. So with the help of this compression mechanism, it's completely reasonable to expect that a 10 GB data which is there in the data source, Power BI with the help of this compression mechanism can compress it, can optimize it till 1 GB. So from 10 GB to 1 GB, and then it will store it in the disk. So you understand how optimized the data is now. In data source, it was of 10 GB and now it is of 1 GB. So you understand data becomes smaller and then the performance will be faster. There will be no lag. So that is the reason why Power BI performs this compression mechanism. Now, how this compression mechanism takes place. Before that, I used a word called VertiPack engine. Let's understand what is this VertiPack engine. VertiPack is, you can think of it as a brain and muscles of Power BI. VertiPack is an engine which provides in-memory columnar database for Power BI's import mode. So whenever you are using import mode, VertiPack engine provides in-memory and columnar database. We'll talk about what is this columnar database in a while, but let's understand that VertiPack engine is that engine which provides memory for Power BI's import mode, which eventually helps in storing the data and compressing the data for faster analysis. So we talked a lot about this compression mechanism and this 10 GB data becoming 1 GB, but how it's happening in the backend, that we need to understand. I'll not deep dive in this compression mechanism right now because that is not a topic for today. Maybe someday later we can talk about it. But today, let's understand this much, that in this column store index, which is the compression mechanism actually, what happens, it's a storage format where the data is stored column by column and not row by row. That is the main technique that Power BI uses, or this engine uses, to compress the data. And with the help of this column store index, which stores the data in column wise and not row wise, this dramatically improves the analytical queries for faster analysis. So if you remember earlier, I used a word columnar database. So this columnar database is nothing but a database where data is stored column by column and not row by row. So this is only column store index as well. The same compression mechanism which Power BI uses to compress the data and optimize the data. That's it. That's it for now. I do not want to go very much into deep, but in case if your interviewer asks that how this compression is happening that you're talking about, you can explain this much, you can explain this mechanism, you can talk about VertiPack engine, you can talk about column store index, and then that much will be enough for you to understand, and that much will be enough for you to make your interviewer understand. That's it. Okay. So that was about import mode. Now, the second mode, which is direct query, let's understand what's happening here. This is nothing like import mode. We do not bring the data, we do not take a snapshot of data and we do not bring it into Power BI. What do? Your data sits in the data source. So in this mode, Power BI lets the data be in the data source, but every time you interact with a visual, it generates a query to interact with the data source. And we're not importing the data here, we're not bringing the data here, we are just with the help of the queries generation, we are trying to interact with the data source. So there's a bridge, you can call that these queries are acting like a bridge, and with the help of these queries, we are interacting with the data source. We are not bringing the whole data in our Power BI desktop. That is the main difference. So in simpler words, you can understand that in direct query, the whole data does not come and sit in our Power BI desktop, but Power BI just brings the metadata. Now by metadata, I mean the table name, the column names, and the data type of the columns. Just these kinds of information comes and gets stored in our Power BI desktop. The main data set is still in the data source only. We have not imported that. So that is the main difference between DirectQuery and import mode. So since in DirectQuery we are not bringing the whole data in Power BI desktop, generally we have three views in Power BI. One is report view, then there is a table view, and then there is a model view. But when you are using DirectQuery, you will not be able to see that table view. You will just have report view and then you will have model view, because remember, you have not brought in the whole data in your Power BI desktop. The main data still sits in data source. You have just brought the metadata, which will just tell you the column names, table names, and the data types. So that information will get stored in your model view. You can still build the relationships, you can change the cardinalities as per the requirement, but you will not be able to see the table view. So now the question is, if there's no table view, then how this whole interaction is happening? How this Power BI desktop is interacting with the main data source? What's happening? How are we getting data from data source? So let's understand how this whole interaction is working. Your report uses DirectQuery. Now what is this DirectQuery? Data analysis expressions. And when your semantic model receives these DAX queries, it generates another set of queries. Okay, so one set of query was DAX query. The DAX query went to the semantic model received the DAX query, and now the semantic model is generating another set of queries to interact with the main data source. So suppose, for example, if your main data source is SQL Server, okay, you wrote the DAX query, your semantic model received the DAX query. Now the semantic model will generate another SQL queries, because your data source is SQL Server, and that this SQL query will interact with the data and get you the data whatever you need. So this is the method Power BI follows to interact with the data and to bring the data into Power BI desktop when you use DirectQuery. Remember, if you're using other data sources, then these queries will be generated in the other languages. I gave you an example of SQL Server. Since here in my example, the data source was SQL Server, that's why semantic model generated SQL query to interact with the SQL Server database. Now we have a basic understanding of what is import, what is DirectQuery. Let's understand the advantages and disadvantages of these both. Okay, so first advantage of import will be, since you have directly brought in the whole data in your Power BI desktop, the performance will be really faster. So you don't have to rely on any additional query generation which will go and then interact with the data source and then bring me the data. You don't have to wait for all this process, because everything is already there stored in the Power BI desktop. So performance will be really faster. So that is one very great advantage of this import mode. And another advantage, I would say, you get full support while using any kind of complex DAX calculations. So import mode supports all kinds of DAX calculations. Then you have this Power Query transformation. Again, there's no restrictions while using Power Query transformation, because, and the reason of all these support is because you already have all data stored in your Power BI desktop. And the third, you do not have any restrictions in data model as well. You can establish any kind of complicated relationships and cardinalities as per your requirement. You can make, so you do not have any restrictions in DAX calculations, in Power Query transformation, or in data modeling. That becomes a significant advantage when it comes to using import method. Now let's discuss the disadvantages of import mode. Since import mode works on this mechanism of bringing the whole data into Power BI desktop, you've got to be careful if your data is way too large. Now by too large, I mean if you have more than 10 GB of data in the data source and you just have pro license of Power BI, then you might want to consider DirectQuery. Because if you bring that much of data into Power BI, then it might start lagging and the queries will respond very slowly. The refresh will not work as faster as expected. So these kind of lagging problem will be there if you are trying to bring more than 10 GB of data with pro license. Okay. Now the second thing I would say, data freshness. What have you done in import mode? You have taken a snapshot of data then available. When you took the snapshot, whatever data was available in the data source, you took the snapshot and you stored in your Power BI desktop. Now after that, whatever update happened in that data source, you could not get that, right? Because you just took a snapshot and you stored in your Power BI desktop. Anytime any update takes place in that data source, that will not flow directly into your Power BI desktop. So to get that, either you have to refresh your data manually to get the live data, or you have to enable schedule refresh, which will perform this whole refresh thing on a scheduled basis, and then your live data will come in the Power BI desktop. Now, if you are working on a report which requires the live data every minute, in that case, you might want to consider DirectQuery, because you might face a lag in bringing the live data. So these were the advantages and disadvantages of import mode. Let's understand the advantages and disadvantages of DirectQuery. So whatever disadvantages you had in import mode, those become advantages in DirectQuery. What were the disadvantages? One, that you have to, the live data will not flow automatically in your Power BI desktop unless you manually refresh it or you enable scheduled refresh. But in DirectQuery, since you have directly connected with the data source, you do not have to rely on any kind of refresh thing. Any kind of live update will directly flow into your Power BI desktop. That is the one very big advantage. So your data is always up to date. So you always have this live data in your Power BI desktop. You don't have to go and you put your head around whether my data is refreshed or not, whether I have enabled scheduled refresh or not, did my refresh fail, and things like that. You don't have to worry about that. Now, third advantage which I feel is important, since you have not brought in any data in DirectQuery, the file size will be very smaller, right? Unlike import. In import, what are you doing? You're bringing the whole data. So the bigger the file, the chances that the file might lag, the chances that it may take time even for a simple save. You made a change and you clicked on Control S. You want to save that change in your Power BI desktop. Now, if the file is bigger, that even maybe 5-6 seconds is going to be 5 minutes. So the bigger the file, the more lag you can expect. In DirectQuery, the file size is very smaller because there is no data stored in the Power BI desktop, just metadata is getting stored. So you don't have to worry about that. Okay, so the file size really becomes smaller when you are using DirectQuery. So that is a big advantage I feel in DirectQuery. Now let's talk about the disadvantages. So when you have used DirectQuery to bring the data, the DAX calculations, Power Query transformation and data modeling, on all these three important steps, you will not get the full support. There will always be restrictions. So with DAX calculations, you will not have the ability to perform any kind of multiple complex DAX. You cannot perform that. There will be restrictions. Same goes with Power Query transformation. It does not support all the properties that we have, and same goes with data modeling as well. So this becomes a very bigger disadvantage if you are working on a report which requires a lot of multiple complex DAX calculations. You might want to go with import mode because DirectQuery does not support it. So these were the detailed explanation of import and DirectQuery. We understood what is this import, we understood the compression mechanism which import uses, we understood the advantages and disadvantages of import. Then we saw the same thing, what happens in DirectQuery, how this whole interaction with data source happens in DirectQuery. Then we also saw advantages and disadvantages of DirectQuery. Now there's a third mode, which is live connection. Let's understand this in a very short manner. I will not go very deep in this because we generally don't use it. You might use in some case, so I'll not dive very deep in this. We just understand in a very short manner what is it. So in live connection, it lets you build a report while not having to build any kind of semantic model. So you have to understand there's a semantic model which already exists, okay? There's a central semantic model, there's a central database of an organization which already exists, and all you have to do is just connect with that semantic model and build a report on the top of it. That is the live connection. So while using live connection, let's understand what are the sources that we can connect our data to. So first, a semantic model, which I just talked about, and the second will be an Azure Analysis Services, which is also called AAS database. And then we have SQL Server Analysis Services, which is also called SSAS. So these are the three data sources with which you can connect the data using live connection mode. Do you remember I talked in DirectQuery that generally in Power BI you have 3 views, but when you use DirectQuery you'll have just 2 views. So you'll have report view and then you'll have model view. So similar to that, even when you use live connection, you'll not be able to see table as well. You'll just have a report view, and then you will have a model view. Because in live connection, you do not have any kind of flexibility to perform any kind of changes on database. That database is already centralized and stored. All you can do is just see the data model and build report on the top of it. That becomes a very big disadvantage of this mode as well. But there are few advantages as well. If you are working in an organization which requires a central database, and it requires more consistent and more secure database, they don't want everybody to interact with the database. In that case, it becomes advantageous. But yes, if you have a requirement where you want to interact with the model, you want to add a new table, if you want to do all those kinds of things, then you might not want to go with the live connection. So yes, we talked about import mode, we talked about direct query, and we talked about live connections. So these are the three important modes that we use to connect our Power BI desktop with the data sources. We understood the advantages and disadvantages, when to use what. Now at the end, I just want to draw a comparison between import, direct query, and live connection. This is for your interview purpose. If you actually been asked that explain me everything in detail, I'll just give you a table, read that table, and you'll be able to answer all kinds of questions in the interviews. Let's start the comparison. So this was it about the modes through which you can bring the data to your Power BI. This is very important conceptually. This is very important if you are going to attend any Power BI interview, you will be asked these questions. So watch this video very carefully, understand every point. If you have any question, drop in the comment section. I'd love to answer that. And I want you to, the comparison which I drew at the end, understand those comparisons, read it, understand it, study hard, and we'll meet in the next session. Bye bye.